Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Kerry Bowers, who is trying to set the standard for the 2016 presidential election. He's a military hero, a successful businessman, and volunteer spokesman for Americans for Fair Taxation, and in fact, he is a candidate for the 2016 United States presidential election. Kerry Bowers, real pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Doug. It's great to be here, and hopefully I have a good message that your audience will be able to reap some benefit from.
So, Kerry, I'd actually like to go into a number of questions I have regarding your view and your platform as it relates to Israel, because this show is an Israel-based show. However, one thing that really caught my eye when I was studying your website and your platform is you talk about setting the standard for the presidential candidates. It's kind of an interesting slogan. How did you come up with that?
Well, that got me very early on. And when I'm talking about a standard, we're not talking about a standard of character. What we're talking about here is a standard in our platform and a standard of campaigning. And what I'm talking about is a standard in this case where the candidates should be required by the people, the electorate, to lay out their platform in details that include their objectives, their strategies to use as they pursue those objectives, goals by which we can measure our progress towards those objectives, and most importantly, a timeline. Now, this is not a standard that I can actually impose, but it is something that I have put out there for the people to seize and look and see what this guy by the name of Kerry Bowers, that most Americans have never heard of, has put together this very detailed plan, and one that really refocuses us back in the direction of the Constitution that I feel we have far too long and too far departed from, but will draw us back there. And it's a plan that Kerry Bowers put together. Someone from out there in right or left field, whichever field you want to choose me from, has put together. And why not hold every candidate to that same standard? In other words, no more generalities, but a standard of the details with the objectives, the strategies, the goals, and the timeline, so that we have something to hold that candidate responsible for in creating that plan and then accountable to once he is elected.
So one of the things you said is you would want the people to demand this, meaning it's not that there would be a law that would require it, but you would expect that people would demand that of the candidates. The problem is these days people are way too busy with their Facebook and their Twitter and their internet and their apathy overall. How can you get them to actually make these demands of their candidates when, frankly, we see that they don't ask anything?
Well, one of the ways that I'm using is through my internet site and through the campaign website that I have, in addition to the various social media. I use Facebook a lot. I use Twitter and the other social media that we have available out there to bring out these ideas that I have been inspired to put down in paper, and in many cases you'll find too, Doug, that I have presented those in a video format. So that people can actually watch it or listen to it in addition to reading it as they may desire. So we're trying to put it out there through various media forms and through various media sources in order that people will capture an idea, and maybe that will draw them in to learn more, as it has in very many cases about my platform. And then when they start examining other candidates, they're going to be looking at them to see how they compare then to what Kerry Bowers has said on a specific issue.
All right. I hope people will get specific, because certainly it does bother me as a consumer of the news to not get straight answers from politicians both on the left and the right. We're talking with Kerry Bowers, who is a 2016 candidate for the Republican nomination. He's looking for that. And we have the real honor to speak with him today. Kerry, I'd like to dive into one of the most important topics, I think, for the listeners on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, which is, as president, how would you create the policy towards Israel, or how would you recreate the current policy towards Israel?
Well, I tell you what, as far as policy and defining that policy of Israel, what I would do is recommend or support one that indicates an arguable commitment to the strengthening and maintenance of a bond between the American people and that of one of our most trusted allies. And I believe that importance arises from many factors that bind our nations together. Some of those are familial ties. There's parallels and ethical standards in the many endeavors in which our nations individually engage, and among others, the values that we share for human rights. So the bottom line is I want it to be well understood that the bond between the United States and Israel is strong. I think there's some repair to be made. Not all of that break in the bond or some of the fractures that we've had in it have come under President Obama's administration. I think it goes back further than that. But we want to assure the American people and the Israeli people that we can strengthen that and maintain that strength as we go forward.
So what would be your message to the crowds that are really developing both on the college campuses in the United States as well as in Europe regarding BDS, the boycott, divest, and sanctions on Israel?
Yeah. When we're talking about boycotting, divestment, and sanctions that are imposed by other nations upon our allies, then I am opposed to that application. And along those lines, I have to applaud the good efforts of the U.S. Congress, and particularly that of Representative Roscom of Illinois, who apparently was able to include wording in recent foreign trade legislation that will prohibit future trade agreements with nations that employ BDS specifically against Israel. And that is something I strongly support, and I would carry that message forward to any audience, whether it be on a college campus or to the Senior Citizen Center down the street, that I would be opposed to that.
One of the main issues I know that comes up in Israel a lot, and in fact between Israeli leaders and American leaders, is the case of Jonathan Pollard, who was an American naval analyst and who was sentenced to life in prison in the United States for sharing information with an ally. And the opportunities have arisen many times for U.S. presidents to pardon him, not only for humanitarian reasons, but simply because he has spent more time behind bars than any other person indicted for spying in the history of the United States. What would your position be on that?
My position on that would be, as it would be really with any case. Number one, as a president, we don't want to jump to any conclusions, and certainly as a candidate, in any case like this, it needs to be reexamined. And in a case such as that, where we had such a stiff sentence imposed upon him, it needs to be reexamined, and I would certainly consider looking at a reexamination of that case and take argument for both sides, for and against, determining whether or not if a pardon would be a justifiable route to take as a president of the United States.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel the economic relationship between the U.S. and Israel could be improved from a policy basis? I know that you really like to talk about nuts and bolts, what you would do. What are some of the steps you think you could take?
Well, I got to tell you, the first thing that has to be done is to implement the plans that I've been inspired to design that will restore and sustain the American economy. If I do not first focus on America, then America will be of declining value to other nations in consequence to our decline in economic, military, and our industrial capabilities. I think that I said it best in my foreign policy document that if we do not restore our economic, industrial, and military capabilities, then we may well be shaped as a nation by the same capabilities of other nations. And I intend to not let that happen. Now, in that strengthening process, we need to reassess where we have commitments today that would be better served to working more closely with our allies, Israel being among the nations that we should aim that focus. We need to examine the resources each of us has to offer for mutual strengthening, and then establish, as I talked about before, objectives, strategies, and goals, and a timeline that will provide the focus to achieve the ends we desire. I will say that I am a proponent of free trade and prefer government to stay out of the business of people doing business to the extent possible. But the government can certainly help pave the way to stronger applications of free enterprise and free trade through deregulation and the elimination of obstructive taxation like that we have today, and that will work to the advantage, actually, of both our nations.
So what you started off by explaining was that one of the most important ways of building up a good trade relationship with Israel is that America itself has to be on solid economic footing. And I know that you've spoken a lot about a balanced budget. So in the last minute or so, tell us, how would you be sure to have a balanced budget, which is just skyrocketing out of control, that quite frankly, many people have no idea how the U.S. could even get back onto a normal track?
Well, the two areas for the United States that we have to focus on is the expenditures of our government and our tax system. It is our tax system that really obstructs our ability to be able to steadily grow our economy. I think the United States GDP is running around 1% or so annually now, and somewhere in that range. That is way too low. We need to change our tax system in order to be able to improve upon our nation economically from that point of view. The one measure that I am a proponent of is that of what we call the fair tax. That's actually been introduced in legislation in our Congress in both the House of Representatives and the Senate in bills H.R. 25 and S. 155. And what that does is that it eliminates all federal income, payroll, corporate, capital gains, estate, and gift taxes and replaces all those with one single national sales tax. Now, it does not eliminate excise taxes and tariffs and those types of things that may continue to exist, but those types of taxes that I just addressed on individuals and businesses will go away. And it's been projected that with the implementation of such a tax system, which would really be the only one like it in the world, we were looking at probably in the first year a 10% growth in our GDP. And I know your background in finances and perhaps offshore and cross-border type activities. What this does is it makes America then really one of the best havens for bringing your resources, your finances into this country, because if you combine the best tax system that doesn't tax those savings and investments in this country, combine that with the fact that we have one of the most secure systems of laws in the world, then you've got the best haven possible to put your money, which means greater capital in this country for us to be able to grow and expand and have actually, I believe, lower driven interest rates based on what the market determines and not what the Fed determines for us. The other thing, of course, too, is through the deregulation, and in the deregulation process, we're making it much easier then for businesses to be able to start a business, to maintain a business, and to grow a business in this country. And instead of gentlemen and ladies sitting around during their board of directors meetings and trying to decide how they can avoid taxation and how they can get around regulation, we're going to have better regulations and better taxation that's not going to interfere in that process. Through this, we will increase our revenues. We will also, in the process, begin reducing the size of government, and I address this quite a bit on my website and even go through each one of the major agencies we have in the government that I would eliminate, reduce the size of government so we reduce those expenditures, start restoring the sovereignty back to the states and let them handle many of the issues that have been picked up by the federal government over the years. So we will have a reduction in expenditures. So bottom line, reduce your expenditures and improve your tax system, and we will get to that balanced budget, and not only balanced, but in the sense that we'll have a surplus that will actually be applied towards reducing our debt. Very critical issue.
That would be quite amazing. Kerry Bowers, the candidate for the 2016 presidential election on the Republican side, he's been explaining to us his policies as well as his major program. What he's trying to bring to the whole table across the board is to set a very high standard for all the presidential candidates. Kerry, in the last few seconds, just tell us, how can people learn more about you?
Absolutely. I encourage them to go to www.Kerry, I spell that Kerry, last name Bowers, B as in Bravo, OWERS.com, and there you can learn a lot more about me and my platform.
Okay.
And I appreciate, Doug, the opportunity to speak with you.
It's our pleasure, and we'll put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Best of luck, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Doug.
You are listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.